The snow fell not in flakes, but in sheets of white fury. It swept across the Montana mountains like Judgment Day, erasing the line between earth and sky. In this white oblivion, Nathaniel Harmon knelt, his weathered frame bent against the storm, before two wooden crosses half buried in snow. 10 years of Montana winters had darkened the wood, but Nathaniel kept them standing. His calloused hands, bare despite the cold, brushed away the fresh powder, revealing the names carved into the crossbeams: Emily Harmon, Grace Harmon, wife, daughter. "Lord!" Nathaniel spoke, his voice lost in the howling wind. "I've come to these graves every day for 10 years. I've asked for forgiveness. I've asked for purpose." The wind tore at his gray-streaked beard, but he remained unmoved like the mountains themselves. "This is my last prayer. If you don't answer tonight, I'll understand." From his coat, he withdrew a Colt revolver, its metal blue-black against the white landscape. He placed it on the snow between the crosses, a final offering. Somewhere in the valley below, a wolf howled, long, mournful echoing across the emptiness. Nathaniel lifted his head. In his 58 years, he'd learned to read signs. The wolf called again, and something in its cry made him pause. After a long moment, Nathaniel retrieved the revolver and tucked it away. "Not tonight, then. One more day," he whispered to the crosses. "One more day with your silence." His cabin stood 100 yards away, a solitary sentinel against the wilderness. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, steady against the chaotic swirl of snow. Nathaniel had built the cabin with his father before the war, when hope still lived in his heart. Before he'd left to fight. Before he'd returned to ashes. Inside, the warmth of the fire met him like an old friend, the only one that had remained faithful. Nathaniel removed his snow-crusted coat and hung it by the door. The cabin was simple but sturdy. One main room with a hearth, a table, 2 chairs, shelves of provisions. A small bedroom lay beyond a door to the back. Everything a man needed to survive. Nothing he needed to live. Nathaniel moved to the bookshelf and withdrew a leather-bound Bible, its edges worn smooth by years of handling. It had belonged to his father, a preacher who believed in redemption until his last breath. Nathaniel opened to the marked page where a faded ribbon held his place at Matthew 19:14. "Suffer little children, and forbid them not to come unto me, for of such is the kingdom of heaven." Tucked into the page was a child's drawing, crude figures of a man, woman, and little girl holding hands beside a house with a chimney that spiraled smoke into a crayon blue sky. At the bottom, in a child's awkward script, "For Papa, love, Grace." Nathaniel traced the figures with his fingertip. 10 years had not dulled the edge of his grief. It remained as sharp as the day he'd found the cabin in ashes, his family gone. He returned the Bible to its shelf and stoked the fire. Outside, the blizzard raged on a wall of white, isolating him from the world. It suited Nathaniel fine. He had said goodbye to the world long ago. The knock came like a whisper against thunder. At first, Nathaniel thought he'd imagined it a trick of the wind or the settling of wood in the cold. But it came again, faint but distinct. 3 soft taps against his door. Nathaniel stood motionless by the fire. In 10 years, no one had come to his door uninvited. The nearest town was 15 miles down the mountain, and no one traveled these heights in winter, especially not in a blizzard like this. The knock came again, weaker this time, desperate. Something pulled Nathaniel to the door, not curiosity, but a sense of inevitability, as if this moment had been waiting for him as long as he had been waiting for it. His hand trembled slightly as he lifted the bar. When the door swung open, The wind rushed in like a hungry ghost, carrying snow and bitter cold. But it was not emptiness that greeted Nathaniel. It was desperation given human form. A woman stood in the threshold, her frame thin beneath a snow-crusted shawl. Her face was pale as death lips blue with cold, but her eyes, they burned with a fierce will to live. Behind her stood two children. A boy of about 10 held his arm protectively around a smaller girl, perhaps 6 years old. The boy's gaze met Nathaniel's without flinching, a man's determination in a child's face. "God led us here," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. Then her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed forward. Nathaniel caught her before she hit the floor, surprised by how little she weighed. The children stepped inside the boy, still shielding his sister, watching Nathaniel with wary eyes. As Nathaniel closed the door against the storm, he glanced skyward through the swirling snow. "You actually heard," he murmured. The woman's name was Eleanor Wells. She told him this after she had revived by the fire, wrapped in Nathaniel's warmest blanket, her hands cradling a cup of hot coffee. Her children were Joseph and Rebecca. The boy remained vigilant at his mother's side, while the little girl slept on a bearskin rug near the hearth, clutching a small Bible to her chest like a doll. "You've traveled far," Nathaniel said, noting the wear on their shoes, the exhaustion etched into their faces. Eleanor nodded, her eyes reflecting the firelight. 7 days through the storm. We lost our horse on the 3rd day, had to continue on foot." "From where?" "Helena," she said. "We had a small house there. After Albert, my husband, passed from consumption this spring, the bank took everything." Nathaniel recognized the lie in her steady gaze, but said nothing. People carried their truths like burdens. He had no right to add to hers. "The mountain's no place for a woman and children," he said instead. "Especially in winter." Eleanor's chin lifted slightly. "Neither is starving in town. At least the wilderness is honest about wanting to kill you." The unexpected edge in her voice made Nathaniel reassess the woman before him. This was not just desperation that had driven her to his door, but determination. A will as strong as the mountains themselves. "You can stay the night," he said. "Storm might break by morning." "It won't," Joseph spoke for the first time, his young voice steady. "This storm's set in. The clouds are too dark, too heavy." Nathaniel looked at the boy with surprise. "You know weather signs?" Joseph nodded. "My father taught me, before he died." Another lie, Nathaniel noted. The family's story had holes large enough to drive a wagon through, but he understood the need for secrets. After all, his cabin stood as a monument to his own. "You'll need dry clothes," Nathaniel said, rising. He moved to an old trunk in the corner, one he hadn't opened in years. Inside were carefully folded women's dresses, a child's nightgown, smaller clothes for winter. He lifted them out gently, as if they might turn to dust in his hands. Eleanor watched him, understanding dawning in her eyes. "Your family, they're gone." Nathaniel cut her off. "These will fit you and the girl. For the boy, I have some old shirts that can be taken in." He placed the clothes beside Eleanor and turned away, giving her privacy. "There's a screen by the bedroom. You can change there. I'll tend the fire." While Eleanor took Rebecca behind the screen, Joseph remained by the fire, his gaze following Nathaniel's every move. "You live here alone?" the boy asked. Nathaniel nodded, adding another log to the flames. "For how long?" 10 years. Joseph considered this. "That's my whole life." Nathaniel glanced at the boy. "Yes, I suppose it is." The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with its whispered secrets. Outside, the storm continued its assault, but inside the cabin something had changed. The space that had held only one man's grief for a decade now contained something else, something Nathaniel wasn't ready to name. Later that night, after Eleanor and the children had eaten a simple meal of venison stew and cornbread, Nathaniel prepared the bedroom for them. "You'll take the bed," he said to Eleanor. "It's not much, but it's warm." "We can't put you out of your room," Eleanor protested. "You're not. I sleep by the fire most nights anyway." It wasn't entirely true, but the woman and her children needed rest more than he did. They looked as though they hadn't slept properly in days. Rebecca had awoken for the meal, but barely spoken. Now she sat on the bearskin rug, her small fingers tracing the wooden carvings Nathaniel had made years ago, a bear, a fox, a deer. They had been Grace's toys. Nathaniel had almost thrown them into the fire after she died, but something had stopped him. Now, watching the little girl play with them, he was glad for that moment of weakness. "These are pretty," Rebecca said softly, holding up the carved deer. "Did you make them?" Nathaniel nodded, something catching in his throat at the innocence in her blue eyes. "For who, Rebecca?" Eleanor warned gently. "Don't pry." "It's all right," Nathaniel said. "They were for my daughter. Her name was Grace." "Where is she now?" Rebecca asked. The cabin fell silent except for the crackling fire. Joseph looked up sharply, sensing the weight of the question. "She's with God," Nathaniel answered simply. Rebecca nodded, accepting this with a child's understanding of loss. "My papa is with God, too. Mama says he's watching over us." "I'm sure he is," Nathaniel said, though he wondered what kind of God would watch children suffer as these had. Eleanor guided her children to the bedroom, pausing at the doorway. "Thank you, Mr. Harmon. We won't impose on your kindness for long." "Nathaniel," he corrected her, "and in this storm there's nowhere else to go. Stay until it passes." After they had gone, Nathaniel sat in his chair by the fire, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of other people settling into sleep in his home. It had been so long since voices other than his own had filled these walls. So long since he'd had to consider another's needs before his own. He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of the fire on his face. For the first time in 10 years, he did not dream of smoke and screams. Instead, he dreamed of nothing at all. Morning brought no relief from the storm. If anything, it had intensified overnight, the wind howling like a wounded beast around the corners of the cabin. Nathaniel rose before dawn, as was his habit, and found Joseph already awake, sitting by the window watching the snow. "It's getting deeper," the boy observed, 3 feet at least. Nathaniel nodded, impressed by the child's attentiveness. "You've got a good eye." "My father said I notice things others don't," Joseph replied, then caught himself. "When he was alive, I mean." Nathaniel busied himself preparing breakfast oatmeal with dried apples and a sprinkle of precious sugar. "Your father sounds like a wise man." Joseph's shoulders tensed. He was. As Eleanor and Rebecca joined them, Nathaniel noticed how the little girl clung to her mother, one hand always touching Eleanor's skirt or arm, as if afraid she might disappear. And Joseph the boy positioned himself by the door, his back straight, eyes constantly moving between his family and the windows. These were not the behaviors of a family that had simply lost their home to debt. These were the actions of people who expected danger to find them. After breakfast, Joseph explored the cabin with curious eyes. He paused at a framed photograph on the wall, Nathaniel in a Union Army uniform standing beside another soldier, both young and solemn-faced. "You fought in the war?" Joseph asked. Nathaniel nodded, continuing to wash the breakfast dishes. "Which side?" "Union, Pennsylvania 9th Regiment." Joseph studied the photograph closer. "Who's the other man?" Nathaniel glanced up. Maxwell Coleridge. We served together. Was he your friend? Yes, Nathaniel said quietly. He was. Did he die? Nathaniel set down the plate he was drying. I thought so for many years. We were separated at Antietam, one of the bloodiest battles of the war. He paused, memories surfacing that he usually kept submerged. I never saw him again. I'm sorry, Joseph said with genuine sympathy that seemed beyond his years. Nathaniel shrugged. War takes more than just lives, son. It takes pieces of the living, too. Eleanor, who had been listening from across the room, met Nathaniel's gaze. Something passed between them, recognition, perhaps. The understanding that comes from carrying similar burdens. The day passed slowly, confined as they were by the storm. Nathaniel taught Joseph how to whittle, giving the boy a small piece of pine and a knife that fit his hand. Rebecca drew pictures with a charcoal stick on scraps of paper Nathaniel found in a drawer. Eleanor mended tears in their traveling clothes with thread and needle Nathaniel provided. As evening approached, Nathaniel prepared to check his traps, storm or not. Survival required vigilance. I need to go out for a while, he announced, pulling on his heavy coat. Stay inside. Keep the fire going. Is it safe? Eleanor asked, glancing toward the window where snow continued to fall in thick curtains. I know these woods even blindfolded, Nathaniel assured her. I won't be long. Joseph stood. Can I come with you? Nathaniel hesitated. The boy was eager, but the storm was dangerous, especially for a child. Not today, he said finally. Another time, perhaps. Disappointment flashed across Joseph's face, but was quickly replaced with understanding. Yes, sir. Nathaniel paused at the door, struck by the formality. It had been a long time since anyone had called him sir. Outside, the cold hit him like a physical blow, but Nathaniel welcomed it. The storm had transformed the familiar landscape into something alien and hostile, but he moved through it with the confidence of long experience, following paths he knew by heart. His traps were set in a wide circle around the cabin, covering game trails that even the deepest snow couldn't completely obscure. The first two traps were empty, but the third held a snowshoe hare already frozen. Nathaniel quickly collected it, grateful for the meat it would provide. As he reset the trap, movement caught his eye a flash of darkness against the white. He froze, hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. Years in these mountains had taught him to trust his instincts, and now they screamed a warning. Someone was watching him. Slowly, Nathaniel scanned the tree line, searching for any disturbance in the curtain of falling snow. Nothing. But the feeling persisted, eyes on him, calculating, assessing. He finished his work quickly and made his way back to the cabin, taking an indirect route and watching for tracks other than his own. The storm would cover them quickly, but fresh impressions might still be visible. He found nothing yet. The unease followed him all the way back to his door. As Nathaniel stomped snow from his boots on the porch, he glanced once more into the white void. If someone was out there, they'd find poor welcome at his door. He hadn't survived this long by taking chances. Inside the cabin glowed with warmth and light. Rebecca had fallen asleep on the bearskin rug, one arm curled around the wooden fox. Joseph sat at the table, continuing his whittling with intense concentration. Eleanor stood by the stove, stirring a pot of something that filled the cabin with a rich, savory aroma. I hope you don't mind, she said, noticing Nathaniel's surprise. I found some dried beans and the last of your onions. Not at all, Nathaniel replied, hanging his coat. He placed the hare on the table. We'll have meat for tomorrow. You're very kind to share your provisions, Eleanor said, her voice low, so as not to wake Rebecca. especially when we came uninvited. Nathaniel busied himself with cleaning the hair, avoiding her gaze. No one chooses to be on this mountain in winter unless they're running from something worse. The wooden spoon in Eleanor's hand paused its stirring. "What makes you think we're running?" Nathaniel began skinning the hair with practiced efficiency. "Your boy watches the door like he expects trouble. You flinch at sudden sounds. And no mother takes her children into a blizzard unless what's behind them is more dangerous than what's ahead." Eleanor's shoulders tensed, then slowly relaxed. "You're observant." "I've had time to practice." They worked in silence for a moment, Nathaniel with his knife, Eleanor with her spoon. It was an oddly domestic scene, one that Nathaniel found both comforting and disturbing. He had grown used to solitude, to the rhythms of a life lived alone. This woman and her children disrupted those rhythms, yet he couldn't bring himself to mind. "Will you tell me what you're running from?" he asked finally. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "Would you believe me if I said bad luck and poverty?" "I might," Nathaniel said, "if your eyes didn't tell a different story." A sad smile touched Eleanor's lips. "Perhaps someday I'll share that story, but not tonight." Nathaniel nodded, respecting her privacy. After all, he had secrets of his own, some buried in the snow outside, others locked deep within his heart. Later, after a meal of bean soup and cornbread, Eleanor tucked Rebecca into bed. Joseph lingered by the fire with Nathaniel, his young face serious in the flickering light. "Mr. Harmon," he said quietly, "we're not just running from winter or being poor." Nathaniel looked at the boy, surprised by his directness. "I know, son." Joseph's eyes darted to the bedroom door, making sure his mother couldn't hear. "There are men after us. Bad men. They want to take Rebecca." A chill that had nothing to do with the storm outside ran through Nathaniel. "Why would they want your sister?" Joseph's face darkened. "Because people will pay for little girls, especially pretty ones with yellow hair." The implication struck Nathaniel like a physical blow. Child trafficking, one of the many evils he'd seen in his time, but among the most despicable. "How do you know this?" he asked, keeping his voice level despite the anger building inside him. "I heard them talking. They thought I was asleep." Joseph's hands balled into fists. "My father tried to stop them. That's how he really died." Before Nathaniel could respond, Eleanor appeared in the bedroom doorway. "Joseph," she called softly, "it's time for bed." The boy rose obediently, but paused beside Nathaniel. "Please don't tell her I told you," he whispered. "She thinks I don't know." Nathaniel nodded solemnly. "It'll stay between us, son." After Joseph had gone, Nathaniel sat alone by the fire, turning the boy's words over in his mind. If what Joseph said was true, and Nathaniel had no reason to doubt him, then Eleanor and her children faced a danger far greater than winter storms or hunger. And by sheltering them, Nathaniel had placed himself in the path of that danger as well. He should feel concern, perhaps even regret, at having opened his door to their troubles. Instead, he felt something stirring inside him that he'd thought long dead purpose. Nathaniel glanced toward the shelf where his Bible sat. Perhaps the Lord had answered his prayer after all, just not in the way he'd expected. The next morning, as Nathaniel taught Joseph how to clean and load a rifle, Eleanor chopped vegetables for a stew. Rebecca sat nearby, humming softly as she played with the wooden animals. The domesticity of the scene struck Nathaniel again, how quickly his solitary existence had been transformed by the presence of these three strangers. As Eleanor reached up to hang a pot, her sleeve fell back, revealing a jagged scar on her forearm. She quickly pulled the fabric down, but not before Nathaniel had seen it. Their eyes met across the room, and something passed between them, a recognition of shared pain. Later, when the children were occupied, Nathaniel approached Eleanor as she stood by the window watching the endless fall of snow. "That scar on your arm," he said quietly. "It's not from a cooking accident." Eleanor didn't turn from the window. "No, it's not. Will you tell me how you got it?" She was silent for so long that Nathaniel thought she wouldn't answer. Then, still gazing out at the storm, she spoke. "My husband Albert wasn't taken by consumption. That was the story we told in town." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "He was shot. By me." Nathaniel kept his expression neutral, though the confession surprised him. "Why?" "Because he sold our daughter." Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes hard as flint. "To men who trade in innocence. When I found out, I took his pistol and confronted him. He said it was already done, that the money had changed hands. When he tried to stop me from taking the children and running, I shot him." She pulled up her sleeve, revealing the full extent of the scar, a long jagged line from wrist to elbow. "He didn't die easily. We fought for the gun." Nathaniel studied her face, searching for signs of deception, but finding only raw truth. "The law's looking for you, then?" "The law thinks a desperate widow took her children west after her husband's death from illness," Eleanor said. "It's the men Albert dealt with who are hunting us. They paid for merchandise they never received." The calm way she referred to her own daughter as merchandise sent a chill through Nathaniel, until he recognized it for what it was, a shield against unbearable pain. "Joseph knows," Nathaniel said. "Not everything, perhaps, but enough." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly. "I feared as much. He's too observant for a child, sees too much." She looked up at Nathaniel, a question in her gaze. "Will you send us away now that you know?" "No," Nathaniel said without hesitation. "But I need to know everything if I'm to help you. Who are these men? How many? And how did you end up on my mountain in the middle of winter?" Eleanor drew a deep breath. "They call themselves the Transcontinental Detective Agency. They work for the railroad, supposedly investigating theft and fraud. But their real business is far darker." "How many?" "I've seen 3 together. Their leader is Victor Coleman, tall, well-dressed, with eyes like ice. The others are just hired guns." Nathaniel nodded, filing away the description. "And how did you find your way here?" A ghost of a smile touched Eleanor's lips. "I told you the truth about that. God led us here. We were lost in the storm, had been wandering for days. I was ready to lie down and die when I saw smoke from your chimney. It was like a beacon in the darkness." Nathaniel considered her words. He'd never been one to believe in divine intervention, not even when his father preached it from the pulpit every Sunday. And after Emily and Grace died, he'd been certain that if God existed, he had turned his back on Nathaniel Harmon. Yet here stood a woman who had walked through hell and still believed in providence. It was a faith Nathaniel had lost long ago. "Well," he said finally, "Providence or luck, you're here now. And I won't turn you out." Relief softened Eleanor's features. "Thank you, Nathaniel." It was the first time she'd used his given name, and something in the way she said it made him acutely aware of how long it had been since he'd heard it spoken by another person. Their conversation was interrupted by Rebecca's excited voice. "Mama, Mr. Harmon, look what I found!" The little girl came running, clutching something in her small hands. She opened them to reveal a silver locket on a delicate chain. "It was under the bed," she explained, eyes shining. "Is it yours, Mr. Harmon?" Nathaniel stared at the locket, his throat suddenly tight. He hadn't seen it in years, had assumed it lost in the fire or stolen afterward. "Yes," he managed. "It belonged to my wife." "It's pretty," Rebecca said, offering it to him. "You should keep it safe." Nathaniel took the locket, his fingers trembling slightly. He opened it to reveal two tiny portraits, a woman with dark hair and gentle eyes, and a little girl with the same eyes and a mischievous smile. "Is that your family?" Eleanor asked softly. Nathaniel nodded, unable to speak. Emily and Grace captured forever in a moment of happiness before smoke and flame and screams. "They're beautiful," Eleanor said. Nathaniel closed the locket and slipped it into his pocket. Yes, they were. Rebecca, sensing the sadness in the air, slipped her small hand into Nathaniel's. "Don't be sad, Mr. Harmon. My papa's gone too, but Mama says he watches over us from heaven. Maybe your family is watching you too." Nathaniel looked down at the child, her face earnest and kind. "Maybe they are, little one." He squeezed her hand gently. "Maybe they are." It was a simple moment, a child's attempt at comfort, a widower's acceptance of it. But in that exchange, something shifted in Nathaniel's heart. A door long closed creaked open, just enough to let in a sliver of light. The storm continued for 3 more days, keeping them confined to the cabin. During that time, a routine emerged. Nathaniel taught Joseph woodcraft and basic survival skills. Eleanor cooked and mended, bringing order to the bachelor's quarters. Rebecca filled the cabin with songs and stories, her childish voice a counterpoint to the howling wind outside. On the 4th day, the storm finally broke. The wind died down to a whisper, and the snow stopped falling, leaving behind a pristine white world that glittered under a cold, clear sky. Nathaniel stepped onto the porch at dawn, breathing in the crisp air. The silence, after days of roaring wind, was profound, almost holy. He surveyed his domain, the snow-laden pines, the vast white meadow, the distant peaks catching the first rays of sun. It was beautiful, but beauty in these mountains often concealed danger. He needed to check his trap line, replenish their firewood, and assess if any damage had been done to the cabin's exterior by the storm. But first, he would visit Emily and Grace. The path to the graves was deep with snow, but Nathaniel waded through it with determined steps. When he reached the crosses, he brushed away the fresh powder, revealing the names he had carved a decade ago. "I didn't come yesterday," he said aloud, "or the day before. I'm sorry for that." He knelt in the snow, heedless of the cold seeping through his trousers. "We have guests, a woman and 2 children. They're in trouble, and they need help." He paused, struggling to articulate the change he felt. I think this is why I'm still here. Why I didn't join you when I wanted to." The crosses stood silent against the blue sky, offering neither confirmation nor denial. Yet Nathaniel felt a weight lift from his shoulders, not the burden of grief which he would carry always, but the heavier load of purposelessness that had defined his existence for 10 years. As he rose to go, movement caught his eye, a flash of color against the white. Nathaniel turned sharply, scanning the tree line. There it was again, a figure moving among the pines, dark against the snow. Nathaniel's hand went to his revolver. Visitors to this mountain were rare, and rarely friendly. He backed away from the graves, keeping his eyes on the trees, and made his way quickly to the cabin. Inside, Eleanor was at the stove, Joseph was whittling by the fire, and Rebecca was setting the table for breakfast. The normality of the scene contrasted sharply with the alarm Nathaniel felt. "Get away from the windows," he said quietly but firmly. Eleanor looked up, instantly alert. "What's wrong?" "Someone's out there, in the trees near the north ridge." Joseph was on his feet immediately, moving to his mother's side. Rebecca, sensing the tension, pressed close to Eleanor's skirts. "How many?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady, despite the fear in her eyes. "I saw only one, but there could be more." Nathaniel moved to a cabinet near the fireplace and withdrew a second revolver. He checked the chambers, then handed it to Eleanor. "You know how to use this." She took the gun with practiced ease. "Yes." Nathaniel nodded, not surprised. "Take the children to the back room. Stay away from the windows. If anyone but me tries to come through that door, shoot them." Eleanor guided Rebecca toward the bedroom. Joseph hesitated, looking back at Nathaniel with worried eyes. "Go with your mother, son," Nathaniel said gently. "I need you to protect them if I can't." The boy nodded solemnly and followed his family into the bedroom. Nathaniel positioned himself by the window, careful to stay out of sight. He watched the tree line, searching for any movement. Minutes stretched into an hour, and still nothing stirred except an occasional raven taking flight. Had he imagined it? No, Nathaniel trusted his instincts too well for that. Someone had been watching, perhaps assessing the cabin and its occupants. But why hadn't they approached? The answer came with the sound of hoofbeats muffled by snow, but growing steadily louder. Nathaniel tensed, gripping his revolver more tightly. 3 riders emerged from the trees, moving with deliberate slowness toward the cabin. Even at a distance, Nathaniel could see that these were not random travelers. They rode with purpose, their postures alert, weapons visible at their sides. The lead rider was tall and lean, dressed in a long dark coat and wide-brimmed hat. As they drew closer, Nathaniel could make out his features, sharp, calculated, with eyes that seemed to take in everything. Victor Coleman, Nathaniel thought. It had to be. The riders stopped about 30 yards from the cabin. The leader raised a hand in greeting, a gesture that might have seemed friendly if not for the coldness in his eyes. "Hello, the cabin!" he called, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. Nathaniel didn't respond, watching and waiting. "We mean no harm," the man continued. "Just looking for some folks who might have passed this way." Still, Nathaniel remained silent. The standoff continued for several long moments, neither side willing to make the next move. Finally, the leader dismounted, handing his reins to one of his companions. He approached the cabin alone, hands held slightly away from his sides to show he wasn't reaching for a weapon. Nathaniel noted the gesture, but wasn't fooled. A man like this would have weapons hidden where hands couldn't reach them. When the stranger was about 15 feet from the porch, Nathaniel stepped outside, revolver held at his side but ready. The 2 men regarded each other with the wariness of wolves from different packs. "Fine morning after the storm," the stranger said, his voice smooth as silk but cold as ice. "Name's Victor Coleman. I represent the Transcontinental Detective Agency." He reached slowly into his coat and withdrew a badge that glinted in the sunlight. "And you are?" "A man who values his privacy," Nathaniel replied. "State your business and be on your way." Coleman's lips curved in what might have been a smile if it had reached his eyes. "Direct. I appreciate that." He tucked the badge away. "We're looking for fugitives. A woman and 2 children. Killed her husband back in Helena and fled with his children. We have a warrant for her arrest." Nathaniel's expression remained impassive. "Haven't seen anyone in weeks. Storms kept the mountain quiet." Coleman studied him, head tilted slightly. "Interesting, because we tracked them this far before the worst of the blizzard hit," and his kemakip shifted to the cabin behind Nathaniel. "That's a big place for one man. Lot of smoke coming from that chimney. Takes a lot of heat to keep warm in winter." "Indeed it does." Coleman's eyes narrowed as he took in Nathaniel's features more carefully. You know, you look familiar. Have we met before? I doubt it. No, I'm certain of it. Coleman snapped his fingers. Wait, Sergeant Harmon, isn't it, from the Pennsylvania Ninth? His smile widened. The famous sharpshooter. I heard you were dead killed at Antietam. Nathaniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. How did this man know who he was? You're mistaken. I don't think so. Coleman took a step closer, his confidence growing. I remember your face from the papers. The Angel of Death, they called you. 43 confirmed kills at Antietam alone. He whistled low. That's quite a record. Nathaniel's grip tightened on his revolver. I told you you're mistaken. Now state your business or move on. Coleman's eyes hardened. My business, Sergeant Harmon, is justice. A murderer and her accomplices are hiding somewhere on this mountain. I intend to find them and bring them to account. He gestured toward the cabin. Would you object if my men and I had a look inside just to be thorough? I would, Nathaniel said, his voice like granite. This is my home, not a way station for every badge carrier who passes by. For a moment, tension crackled between them like electricity before a storm. Then Coleman's posture relaxed, though his eyes remained cold and calculating. Very well. I respect a man's right to his castle. He took a step back. But if you do happen to see a woman pretty dark-haired, with a boy of 10 and a fair-haired girl of 6, I'd appreciate it if you'd let me know. We'll be making camp down by the creek, planning to stay until we find what we're looking for. Nathaniel said nothing, watching as Coleman returned to his horse with unhurried steps. The three riders turned their mounts and headed back toward the trees, but before they disappeared from sight, Coleman looked back over his shoulder. Good day, Sergeant, he called. I'm sure we'll meet again soon. When they were gone, Nathaniel remained on the porch for several long minutes, scanning the tree line for any sign that they had left a watcher behind. Satisfied they were truly gone for now, he returned inside. Eleanor stood in the bedroom doorway, the revolver still in her hand. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear and determined. It was them, she said. It wasn't a question. Nathaniel nodded. Victor Coleman and 2 others. They're camping by the creek, waiting. He knows we're here. He suspects, Nathaniel corrected, but he's not certain enough to force his way in. Not yet. Joseph appeared beside his mother. What do we do now? Nathaniel looked at the boy, then at Eleanor, and finally at Rebecca, who peered around her mother's skirts with wide, frightened eyes. These people had come to him for shelter from a storm, but now they faced a different kind of tempest, one that bullets and badges and false justice. In that moment, Nathaniel Harmon made his decision. After 10 years of exile and grief, of penance and solitude, he had been given a purpose. These 3 lives had been placed in his path, or perhaps he had been placed in theirs. Now, he said, his voice firm with resolve, we prepare, because Coleman and his men won't wait forever, and when they come, we'll be ready for them. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting long shadows across the cabin floor. Outside, the sun glinted off pristine snow, and somewhere in the distance a wolf howled, a lone sentinel warning of dangers to come. But inside, 4 souls found themselves bound together by circumstance and choice, by danger and determination. For Nathaniel Harmon, who had waited 10 years for an answer to his prayers, it had finally come, not in the form of peace or forgiveness, but in the shape of a widow and her children, and the chance to protect what he had once failed to save. The storm had passed, but the danger remained. In the days that followed Coleman's visit, Nathaniel transformed his mountain sanctuary into a fortress. He reinforced doors, boarded vulnerable windows, and stockpiled supplies. What had once been a hermit's refuge now became a stronghold for 4 souls bound by circumstance and approaching peril. Joseph followed Nathaniel like a shadow, absorbing every lesson with solemn intensity. The boy who had arrived at the cabin, frightened and exhausted, now moved with growing confidence, his eyes alert, his hands steady, as Nathaniel taught him to load a rifle. "Not too tight," Nathaniel instructed, watching as Joseph measured powder. "Just enough to fire true." "Yes, sir," Joseph replied, his small fingers working with surprising dexterity. At 10 years old, he carried himself with the gravity of a much older soul. "You're a quick study," Nathaniel observed. Joseph tamped the powder carefully. "I have to be, for Rebecca and Mama." The weight in those words stirred something in Nathaniel's chest, admiration mingled with sadness that a child should bear such responsibility. "Your sister and mother are fortunate to have you," he said, resting a hand briefly on Joseph's shoulder. The boy looked up, surprise flickering across his face at the gesture of approval. A small smile tugged at his lips before he returned his attention to the rifle. Inside the cabin, Eleanor worked with equal determination. She had taken stock of their provisions, organized supplies, and mended clothing with efficient precision. The quiet chaos of Nathaniel's bachelor existence yielded to her steady hand, transforming into something that felt increasingly like a home. Rebecca brought an unexpected lightness to their preparations. She turned the wooden animals Nathaniel had carved into sentinels, placing them at windows and doorways. "They're watching for the bad men," she explained, when Nathaniel asked about her arrangement. "The bear is the strongest, so he guards the front door." Nathaniel knelt beside her, examining the wooden bear standing vigilant by the threshold. "That's good thinking," he said seriously. "Bears are fierce protectors." Rebecca nodded, her blue eyes solemn. "Like you, Mr. Harmon." The simple comparison touched Nathaniel more deeply than he cared to admit. He had been many things in his life: soldier, husband, father, survivor, but he had never thought of himself as a protector. Not since he had failed to protect his own family. In the evenings, they gathered by the fire, their shadows dancing on log walls, as Nathaniel taught Joseph and Eleanor to handle weapons. Rebecca sat nearby, humming softly as she played with her wooden animals, seemingly oblivious to the grim lessons, but never wandering far from her mother's side. On the 3rd night after Coleman's visit, when the children had gone to bed, Nathaniel and Eleanor sat by the dying fire. The cabin creaked softly in the cold, a familiar chorus that had once been Nathaniel's only company. "You were a soldier," Eleanor said, breaking the comfortable silence. "In the war." Nathaniel nodded, his eyes fixed on the glowing embers. "A lifetime ago." "Coleman called you the Angel of Death." A muscle tightened in Nathaniel's jaw. "A newspaper name, nothing more." "But you were a sharpshooter." "Yes." The single word carried the weight of countless memories, the cold calculation of distance and wind, the moment of perfect stillness before pulling the trigger, the distant fall of men who never saw their death coming. Eleanor studied his face in the firelight. "You don't have to tell me if it pains you." Nathaniel sighed, running a hand through his graying beard. "It was another life, another man." He paused, then continued, his voice low. "I was good at killing. Too good, perhaps. The officers noticed, and soon I wasn't just a soldier anymore. I was a weapon they aimed at specific targets." "Officers? Men like Coleman? No." Nathaniel's eyes hardened. "Coleman's no military man, despite his airs. But he knows of me somehow, and that troubles me." He turned to face Eleanor directly. "There's something he's not saying, some connection I can't place." Eleanor leaned forward, her face grave in the firelight. What will we do when he returns? He won't stay at that creek forever. No, he won't. Nathaniel rose and moved to the window, peering into the darkness beyond. Coleman's type prefers to let fear do their work. He's waiting, hoping we'll make a mistake or try to run. We could, Eleanor suggested. Run, I mean. Now that the storm has passed, we could try to reach the next town. Nathaniel shook his head. 15 miles through 3 feet of snow, with a 6-year-old Coleman would catch you before you made it halfway. He turned back to face her. Besides, this is my mountain. I know every trail, every cave, every vantage point. Here, we have a chance. Eleanor looked at him with an intensity that made him suddenly self-conscious. Why are you doing this, Nathaniel, taking such a risk for people you barely know? The question hung in the air between them, demanding an honesty Nathaniel rarely allowed himself. He returned to his chair, considering his words carefully. 10 years ago, I lost everything that mattered to me. He began, his voice barely above a whisper. My wife, Emily. My daughter, Grace. Our home. All gone in a single night while I was away. The fire, Eleanor said softly. Rebecca found the locket. Nathaniel nodded. I told myself it was an accident. A stove left burning, perhaps, or a chimney spark. I buried them on the hill and built this cabin with my own hands. Made my peace with God, or thought I had. He paused, the familiar pain constricting his chest. But that wasn't the whole truth. I came back from the war changed. Started drinking, gambling, trying to forget the things I'd seen, the things I'd done. His hands clenched into fists on his knees. I fell in with men who prey on weakness. Borrowed money I couldn't repay. Eleanor's eyes widened with understanding. They burned your home. As a warning. Nathaniel's voice had gone flat, emotionless. But Emily and Grace were inside. They weren't supposed to be there that night. They were meant to be visiting her sister. The fire popped and hissed, filling the silence that followed his confession. So you see, Nathaniel continued finally, I understand what it means to be hunted, to live with the knowledge that your choices led to innocent suffering. He met Eleanor's gaze directly. Perhaps this is my chance to set something right. Eleanor reached across the space between them and placed her hand over his clenched fist. Or perhaps it's a chance for both of us to find redemption. Nathaniel looked down at her hand, smaller than his, but strong and certain. When was the last time another person had touched him with such simple compassion he couldn't remember? Perhaps, he agreed softly. They sat like that for a long moment, connected by touch and shared understanding, until the fire burned low and the night grew deeper around them. Morning arrived crisp and clear, the world outside the cabin a dazzling expanse of white under a cobalt sky. Nathaniel rose before dawn, as was his habit, and stepped onto the porch to survey his domain. The pristine snow stretched unbroken to the tree line, no tracks or disturbances to indicate unwelcome visitors had approached in the night. Yet something felt wrong. The forest was too quiet, the mountain air too still. Even the ravens that usually circled above the pines were absent. Nature knew things that men could only sense, and right now every instinct Nathaniel possessed told him that danger was approaching. He returned inside to find Eleanor already awake, tending the fire. One look at his face told her everything she needed to know. "They're coming," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. Nathaniel nodded. Not yet, but soon. He moved to the cabinet where he kept his weapons and began checking each one methodically. We need to prepare the children. Joseph emerged from the bedroom, hair tousled from sleep, but eyes alert. "Is it time?" he asked with a child's directness that made the question all the more poignant. "Soon," Nathaniel answered honestly. "Today, we'll show you the hiding place I've prepared in case the worst happens." After a simple breakfast, Nathaniel led them to what appeared to be a solid section of floor near the back wall. He knelt and removed a bearskin rug, revealing a trap-door built so seamlessly into the planking that it was nearly invisible. "Root cellar," he explained, lifting the heavy door to expose a narrow ladder leading down into darkness. "I dug it deeper last year, added supports, and a tunnel that comes out about 50 yards behind the cabin under a fallen log." Joseph peered down into the darkness with undisguised curiosity. "A secret passage," he whispered, a flash of boyish excitement breaking through his usual solemnity. Nathaniel lit a lantern and descended first, holding it high to illuminate the space below. The cellar was small but well constructed, with sturdy timber supports and shelves lined with preserved foods, water, and emergency supplies. A narrow tunnel barely wide enough for a man to crawl through extended from the far wall. "If anything happens to me," Nathaniel instructed, as they all stood in the cramped space, "you come down here, secure the trapdoor from below with this bar." He demonstrated the simple mechanism, then follow the tunnel. "It's a tight fit, but even you, Eleanor, should manage. Once outside, head east toward the ridge. There's a cave marked with 3 white stones. You'll be safe there until you can move on." Eleanor surveyed the escape route with grim approval. "You've thought of everything." "Not everything," Nathaniel admitted, "but enough, I hope." Rebecca, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "I don't want to hide in the dark," she said, her small voice quavering. "I want to stay with you, Mr. Harmon." Nathaniel knelt to her level, meeting her frightened gaze. "The dark can be scary," he acknowledged. "But sometimes it protects us when the light can't." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a tiny carved wooden star that gleamed with fresh polish. "I made this for you. Stars guide us home when we're lost." Rebecca took the star, her eyes wide. "Like the Star of Bethlehem that led the wise men to baby Jesus." "Just like that," Nathaniel confirmed, surprised and touched by her biblical reference. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching the star tightly. "I'll be brave in the dark." Nathaniel felt a constriction in his chest as he looked at this child so small, so vulnerable, yet facing terrors that would break many grown men. "I know you will," he said softly. They climbed back into the cabin, Nathaniel securing the trapdoor and replacing the bearskin rug. The remainder of the morning was spent in final preparations, checking weapons, securing doors and windows, positioning supplies where they could be quickly accessed. As midday approached, Nathaniel paused in his work, a familiar sensation prickling at the back of his neck. He moved to the window, careful to stay hidden as he surveyed the tree line. There, a flash of movement among the pines, then another, shadows detaching themselves from the forest, moving with deliberate stealth toward the cabin. "They're here," he said quietly. Eleanor immediately gathered Rebecca, ushering her toward the bedroom. Joseph hesitated, his young face set in determination. "I want to help," he insisted. Nathaniel looked at the boy, barely 10 years old, but standing as tall as his small frame, a loud chin lifted in defiance of his own fear. "You will help," Nathaniel assured him, "by protecting your mother and sister if I fall. That's the most important job of all." Reluctantly, Joseph nodded and followed his mother. Nathaniel turned his attention back to the approaching threat. He counted 5 figures. Now, not 3, Coleman had brought reinforcements. They moved in a practiced formation, using trees and rocks for cover, as they advanced across the open ground toward the cabin. Nathaniel positioned himself by the window rifle ready, but not yet visible. Let them think he was unaware of their approach. Let them come closer into the open, where their advantage of numbers would matter less, against a marksman of his skill. The minutes stretched like hours, as the men drew nearer, their dark shapes stark against the white landscape. When they were about 100 yards out, they paused, seemingly conferring. Then they split up, 2 circling toward the back of the cabin, 3 continuing their direct approach. Nathaniel had anticipated this. The cabin had only 2 entrances, the front door and a smaller rear door that led to the woodshed. Both were barricaded from within, reinforced with additional timber. The windows were narrow, designed more for defense than light, with shutters that could be quickly secured. He waited, controlling his breathing, as he had been taught long ago. In-out, slow and steady. The familiar calm of the sharpshooter settled over him, a detachment that allowed him to see clearly, to calculate without emotion. When the first man reached the edge of the clearing about 50 yards from the cabin, Nathaniel fired. The rifle's report shattered the mountain silence, and the man dropped, clutching his leg. Not a killing shot Nathaniel had aimed to wound. Death had followed him too long. He would not invite it back unless absolutely necessary. The other men scattered, diving for cover. A voice called out Coleman's smooth, controlled tones carrying across the snow. "That was a warning. I take it, Sergeant Harmon." A pause. "You know, harboring fugitives is a serious offense. Murder even more so." Nathaniel didn't respond, repositioning himself at another window to track the men he could no longer see. "The woman is wanted for killing her husband," Coleman continued. "A respectable engineer with the railroad. She took his children and ran. Is that the kind of criminal you want to protect?" Again, Nathaniel remained silent. He knew Coleman's game, trying to sow doubt to make him question his choices. But Nathaniel had made his decision. Eleanor Wells might have blood on her hands, but it was the blood of a man who would sell his own child. In Nathaniel's judgment, some sins demanded their own atonement. A shot rang out from the direction of the woodshed, one of the men attempting to breach the rear door. Nathaniel moved swiftly, taking up position at the back window. He could see a figure hunched by the woodpile trying to work the door latch while staying under cover. Nathaniel's second shot splintered the wood inches from the man's hand. The would-be intruder scrambled back, cursing loudly. "You can't keep this up forever, Harmon," Coleman shouted. "We have supplies, men time. What do you have? An old cabin and a murdering whore." The crude insult stirred Nathaniel's anger, but he tamped it down. Anger made men careless, and carelessness got men killed. Instead, he called back for the first time, "I have the high ground, Coleman, and I've killed better men than you from farther away." A tense silence followed his words. Then, unexpectedly, Coleman laughed, a cold, appreciative sound. "So you have, Sergeant. So you have." A pause. "What if I told you we're not here for the woman? What if our real interest is in the child?" Nathaniel's blood ran cold. Joseph's words echoed in his memory. "People will pay for little girls, especially pretty ones with yellow hair. The girl stays here," Nathaniel responded, his voice hard as iron, "as does her mother and brother." "The boy isn't even hers," Coleman replied, his voice carrying a note of smug satisfaction. "Did she tell you that Joseph belongs to her dead husband's brother? She kidnapped him along with Rebecca." Nathaniel glanced toward the bedroom where Eleanor and the children waited. Could it be true? He dismissed the thought immediately. Coleman was trying to divide them, to plant seeds of doubt. It was a tactic Nathaniel recognized from his military days: demoralize your enemy before attacking. "I'm not interested in your lies, Coleman." "No lies, Sergeant. Only business. The girl was sold and paid for before her father's unfortunate death. We're simply here to complete the transaction." Nathaniel's finger tightened on the trigger. There will be no transaction. Not today. Not ever. Coleman sighed, the sound carrying clearly in the cold air. I was afraid you might take that position. Unfortunately, it means we'll have to do this the hard way. Before Nathaniel could respond, a fusillade of shots peppered the cabin from multiple directions. Glass shattered as bullets punched through windows. Wood splintered. Nathaniel dropped to the floor, crawling toward the relative safety of the stone hearth. The barrage continued for nearly a minute, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. In the ringing silence that followed, Nathaniel heard a small whimper from the bedroom. "Stay down," he called. "Are you hurt?" "We're all right." Eleanor's voice came back steady despite the circumstances. "Joseph's keeping Rebecca calm." Nathaniel risked a glance out a shattered window. The attackers had used the gunfire as cover to advance closer. He could see one man behind a woodpile not 30 yards from the cabin. Another had taken position behind a massive pine stump to the east. The others, including Coleman, remained out of sight. This was no longer a standoff. It was a siege. And sieges were won by those with greater resources, greater numbers, or greater patience. Nathaniel had none of these advantages. What he did have was knowledge of the terrain, a lifetime of survival skills, and the fierce determination of a man with nothing left to lose, except he realized with a jolt the 3 souls who now depended on him. A movement at the edge of his vision caught Nathaniel's attention. Someone was approaching from the north, a lone figure trudging through the deep snow. Not one of Coleman's men. They were all accounted for. This was someone new. Nathaniel adjusted his position for a better view. The newcomer was elderly, dressed in a heavy black coat and wide-brimmed hat that marked him as a man of the cloth. A minister here. In the middle of a gunfight, it seemed impossible. Yet the old man continued his steady approach, apparently oblivious to the danger. When he was about 70 yards from the cabin, Coleman's voice rang out. "Hold your fire! There's a civilian approaching." The elderly minister paused, looking around as if only now becoming aware of the situation. He raised his hands slowly, showing he was unarmed. "Hello there," he called, his voice surprisingly strong for his apparent age. "Is someone in need of assistance? I saw gunfire from the ridge." Coleman emerged partially from cover, keeping his rifle trained on the cabin. "This is police business, Father. I suggest you move along." The old man squinted at Coleman, then at the cabin, then back to Coleman. "Police, you say, out here in the wilderness. That's unusual." He took a step closer. "I'm Reverend Michael Thornton from Pine Creek. I was making my rounds to the outlying homesteads when I heard the commotion." Nathaniel watched the exchange with growing interest. Pine Creek was the nearest settlement, a small mining town about 15 miles east. He had visited it only rarely in his years on the mountain, preferring solitude to the rough company of miners and traders. "This is a dangerous situation," Reverend Coleman said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "We're apprehending dangerous fugitives." Reverend Thornton looked toward the cabin with renewed interest. "Fugitives, you say, in Nathaniel Harmon's cabin?" "That's hard to believe. I've known Nathaniel for years. A more peaceful soul you'd be hard-pressed to find since his troubles." Nathaniel frowned. He had never met this minister before, of that he was certain. Yet the old man spoke as if they were well acquainted. Coleman seemed equally confused. "You know Harmon?" "Of course," Thornton replied easily. "His father was a preacher before him, you know. Not of my denomination, but a good man nonetheless. We've kept an eye on Nathaniel since the tragedy." He sighed heavily. "Losing one's family in such a manner, it would break most men." A chill ran down Nathaniel's spine. How did this stranger know so much about him, about his father, about the fire? Coleman lowered his rifle slightly, interest overcoming caution. "What exactly do you know about Harmon's family?" Thornton removed his hat, revealing a shock of white hair. "Only what everyone in these parts knows. His wife and child died when their home burned. Some say it was an accident. Others—" He trailed off, glancing meaningfully at Coleman. "Well, rumors spread in small communities." "What rumors?" Coleman pressed. Thornton stepped closer, lowering his voice conspiratorially, though still loud enough for Nathaniel to hear. "They say Harmon owed money to some very dangerous men. Men who don't take kindly to being denied payment." He shook his head sadly. "A terrible business, if true." Coleman's posture changed subtly, a tensing of shoulders, a slight shift of weight. "These men," he said carefully. "Did they have names?" "Oh, I couldn't say," Thornton demurred. "A man of the cloth doesn't traffic in such unsavory matters." He glanced toward the cabin again. "Perhaps I could speak with Nathaniel, offer spiritual counsel in this difficult time." Coleman hesitated clearly, torn between suspicion and the opportunity to use the old man to their advantage. "Reverend," he said finally, "if you can convince Harmon to release the fugitives he's harboring, you'd be doing the Lord's work and upholding the law in one stroke." Thornton smiled benignly. "I shall certainly try, though Nathaniel can be stubborn when his conscience is engaged." He started toward the cabin, then paused. "May I tell him that no harm will come to him if he cooperates? That would ease his mind considerably." Coleman's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, Reverend. We're officers of the law. We're here for the fugitives, not Harmon." Thornton nodded and continued his approach to the cabin. Nathaniel watched him come rifle ready, but not aimed. Something about this situation felt wrong, or perhaps too right, too convenient. Yet what choice did he have but to hear the old man out? "Nathaniel Harmon," Thornton called when he was about 20 feet from the porch. "It's Reverend Thornton from Pine Creek. May I approach to speak with you?" Nathaniel called back. "I don't know any Reverend Thornton." The old man smiled unperturbed. "No, you wouldn't. I came to the district after you'd already taken to the mountain, but I knew your father, Jonathan Harmon, a fine preacher and a better man." The mention of his father's name, the correct name, gave Nathaniel pause. Few people in these parts would know that detail. "Approach slowly," Nathaniel instructed. "Hands where I can see them." Thornton complied, moving with the careful dignity of age, until he stood at the foot of the porch steps. Up close, Nathaniel could see a face weathered by years and elements, yet sharp with intelligence. The old man's eyes, a startling blue, met his without fear. "May I come inside?" Thornton asked. "What I have to say shouldn't be overheard." Nathaniel hesitated, then nodded curtly. He opened the door just enough to allow the minister to slip through, then secured it again. Inside, Thornton removed his hat and gloves, surveying the cabin with interest. "You've made quite a home here," he observed. "Solitary but sturdy, like its owner." "State your business, Reverend," Nathaniel said, keeping his rifle ready. "And explain how you know things about me that you shouldn't." Thornton smiled, the expression transforming his austere features into something almost grandfatherly. "I know many things, Nathaniel. For instance, I know that the men outside are not lawmen despite their claims. They're hired guns working for Victor Coleman, who is himself employed by certain interests in the railroad that prefer to operate in shadows." Nathaniel's suspicion deepened. "And how would a minister come by such information?" "Because I've been tracking them," Thornton replied simply, "for nearly a year now, ever since they murdered a deacon of my church who discovered their operation." His expression hardened. "These men traffic in human lives, Nathaniel, particularly young girls sold to houses of ill repute across the territories. Eleanor emerged from the bedroom, revolver in hand. "He's telling the truth," she said. "About Coleman, at least. That's why we're running." Thornton turned to her, his expression softening. "Mrs. Wells, I presume, and the children." He glanced toward the bedroom door where Joseph stood protectively, Rebecca half hidden behind him. "How do you know us?" Eleanor demanded. "I don't, not personally, but I know of you." Thornton sighed heavily. "Your husband Albert wasn't the first man to sell a child to Coleman's organization, but he might have been the first to regret it enough to try to stop the sale." Eleanor's hand tightened on her gun. Albert regretted nothing except being caught. He would have sold Rebecca without a second thought if I hadn't discovered the arrangement. Thornton nodded gravely. "Perhaps. Men's hearts are often darker than we wish to believe." He turned back to Nathaniel. "But now we have a more immediate concern. Coleman and his men won't leave without the girl. They've invested too much, and their clients are not the kind who accept disappointment." "Then they'll die disappointed," Nathaniel stated flatly. "The girl stays here." Thornton smiled a genuine expression of approval. "I hoped you'd say that. Which brings me to why I'm really here." He lowered his voice. "I've brought help. Coleman was so focused on you that he failed to notice my companion circling around to the East Ridge." Nathaniel's eyes narrowed. "What companion?" "An old friend of yours," Thornton replied. "One you thought lost at Antietam." Before Nathaniel could respond, a shot rang out from somewhere to the east. One of Coleman's men cried out in pain. Another shot followed immediately, and another cry. Coleman's voice rose in alarm. "We're being flanked. Fall back to the trees." Through the window, Nathaniel could see Coleman's men retreating in confusion, firing blindly toward the ridge where the shots had originated. "Your friend is an excellent shot," Thornton observed calmly, "though perhaps not quite your equal in your prime." Nathaniel stared at the old minister, a wild hope rising in his chest. Maxwell Coleridge is alive." Thornton nodded. "And serving as sheriff of Pine Creek these past 5 years. A good man, though troubled by his past, much like yourself." Outside, the gunfire intensified as Coleman and his remaining men exchanged shots with the unseen marksman on the ridge. Nathaniel moved to the window, assessing the tactical situation with practiced ease. Coleman's force was divided, confused, taking fire from an unexpected quarter. It was the perfect moment to press the advantage. "Stay here," he instructed Eleanor and Thornton. "Keep the children in the bedroom." Before anyone could object, Nathaniel slipped out the front door, staying low and using the porch pillars for cover. From his new vantage point, he could see one of Coleman's men lying motionless in the snow. Another was wounded, crawling toward the tree line. Coleman himself and one remaining gunman had taken cover behind a fallen log, firing sporadically toward the ridge. Nathaniel aimed carefully and fired. His shot struck the log inches from Coleman's head, sending splinters flying. Coleman ducked, then looked directly at the cabin, his face contorted with rage. "This isn't over, Harmon," he shouted. "Not by a long shot. It's over today," Nathaniel called back. "Take your wounded and go while you still can." Another shot from the ridge kicked up snow near Coleman's position, emphasizing Nathaniel's point. After a moment's hesitation, Coleman signaled to his remaining man. Together, they dragged their wounded companion toward the trees, retreating in grudging defeat. Nathaniel watched them go, maintaining his vigilance until they disappeared into the forest. Only then did he lower his rifle and scan the eastern ridge, searching for a sign of his mysterious ally. A figure emerged from the tree line, their tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the confidence of a man accustomed to combat. As he drew closer, features became visible: a weathered face beneath a wide-brimmed hat, a star-shaped badge glinting on his chest, a rifle held with casual competence. Nathaniel felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly buckled his knees. "Maxwell," he whispered. The approaching man raised a hand in greeting, a gesture so familiar that it spanned the years between them like a bridge across time. Maxwell Coleridge, friend, comrade, brother in arms, alive, after all this time. When Maxwell reached the clearing before the cabin, he stopped, regarding Nathaniel with eyes that held both warmth and wariness. "Been a long time, Nate," he said, his voice gruff with suppressed emotion. 13 years, Nathaniel replied. "I thought you were dead." A ghost of a smile touched Maxwell's lips. "Thought the same about you. Seems we were both wrong." For a moment, neither man moved. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they closed the distance between them. Maxwell extended his hand, and Nathaniel took it. But a handshake wasn't enough for 13 years of absence, for the bond forged in blood and gunfire. Nathaniel pulled his old friend into a rough embrace, which Maxwell returned with equal fervor. "How?" Nathaniel asked when they separated. "I saw you fall at Antietam." "Took a Minié ball to the shoulder," Maxwell explained, touching the spot with unconscious memory. "Woke up in a field hospital 3 days later. By then, your regiment had moved on." He studied Nathaniel's face. "They told me you were among the fallen, listed as killed in action." Nathaniel shook his head. "I was wounded, but not badly. When I recovered, they transferred me to a sharpshooter unit." His expression darkened. "Changed my name in the records. Changed everything." Understanding dawned in Maxwell's eyes. "The angel of death," he said softly. "That was you." Nathaniel nodded once, a sharp, pained gesture. "Not a name I chose, or one I'm proud of." Maxwell clasped his shoulder. "War makes devils or angels of us all, and rarely lets us choose which." The wisdom in those words, the absolution they offered, eased something in Nathaniel's chest that had been tight for years. Reverend Thornton emerged from the cabin, followed by Eleanor and the children. Introductions were made, explanations exchanged. While the adults talked, Rebecca approached Nathaniel and tugged at his sleeve. "Mr. Harmon," she said when he knelt to her level, "are the bad men gone now?" Nathaniel glanced at Maxwell, who shook his head slightly. "Not gone for good, little one," Nathaniel answered honestly, "but gone for today, and we have friends now to help us keep you safe." Rebecca considered this, then nodded solemnly. "The wooden bear worked," she declared. "He scared them away." Nathaniel smiled, a rare expression that softened the hard lines of his face. "I think he had some help from Sheriff Coleridge here." Rebecca studied Maxwell with a child's direct curiosity. "Are you Mr. Harmon's friend?" Maxwell's weathered face creased in a smile. "Since we were younger than your brother." "Then you're my friend too," Rebecca decided with the simple logic of childhood. She took Maxwell's large hand in her small one. "Do you want to see my star Mr. Harmon made it for me? It helps me be brave in the dark." As Rebecca led Maxwell into the cabin to show him her treasured wooden star, Nathaniel found himself standing beside Thornton on the porch. "You knew," Nathaniel said quietly. "About Maxwell. About me. How—" Thornton gazed out at the mountains, their peaks gleaming in the late afternoon sun. "Your father and I corresponded for many years, though we never met in person. When I took the position at Pine Creek, I found letters he had written about you among the church records." He turned to Nathaniel, his eyes kind but penetrating. "He never lost faith in you, even after you stopped writing home." even after you changed your name and disappeared into these mountains." The mention of his father stirred memories Nathaniel had long suppressed, of a tall, stern man with gentle hands and a voice that could thunder God's judgment or whisper his mercy with equal conviction. He died believing I'd failed him, Nathaniel said, the old pain evident in his voice. Thornton shook his head. He died believing you would find your way back to faith in your own time. He understood that some journeys must take us far from home before we can truly return. Inside the cabin, Rebecca's laughter rang out, a clear, innocent sound that seemed to chase shadows from corners long dark. Joseph's voice joined hers, then Maxwell's deeper tones. The sounds of family, of connection, of life, continuing, despite all that threatened it. Nathaniel looked at Thornton with new understanding. "You believe this is part of that journey, these people coming to my door?" "I believe," Thornton said carefully, "that prayers are answered in unexpected ways. Sometimes the answer comes as a storm, sometimes as a child's laughter, sometimes as an old friend returned from the dead." He smiled. "The question is whether we recognize the answer when it comes." Eleanor appeared in the doorway, her face composed, but her eyes reflecting the day's emotional toll. "Joseph is showing the sheriff his whittling," she explained. "Rebecca has decided he's family now." "Children know," Thornton said cryptically, then excused himself to join the others inside. Eleanor moved to stand beside Nathaniel, both of them gazing out at the snow-covered landscape. The sun was beginning its descent behind the western peaks, painting the world in shades of gold and rose. "Coleman will return," she said, not a question, but a statement of fact. "Yes," Nathaniel agreed, "but not today, and not alone when he does." Eleanor nodded, understanding the unspoken promise in his words. They stood in companionable silence as the light faded, each lost in private thoughts. Finally, Eleanor spoke again, her voice soft with tentative hope. "Reverend Thornton has offered us sanctuary in Pine Creek. The church has rooms where we could stay until it's safe." Nathaniel felt a pang at the thought of his cabin returning to silence, of these people who had brought such unexpected change to his life moving on. Yet he knew it was the sensible course. Pine Creek had a sheriff, a community protection that his isolated homestead couldn't provide. "That would be wise," he said, striving to keep his voice neutral. "Maxwell Sheriff Coleridge is a good man. He'll keep you safe." Eleanor studied his profile, reading more than he intended to reveal. "You could come with us," she suggested. "There's nothing holding you here except memories." The offer caught Nathaniel unprepared. Leave the mountain. After 10 years of self-imposed exile, the thought was simultaneously terrifying and liberating. "I don't know if I belong among people anymore," he admitted. "I've been alone too long." Eleanor's hand found his, her fingers warm despite the cooling air. "You belong with those who need you," she said simply, "and who you need in return." The touch of her hand, the truth in her words, they reached places in Nathaniel long closed off, sealed away with his grief and guilt. He looked down at their joined hands, then back to her face, seeing there a reflection of his own loneliness, his own hope. Before he could respond, Joseph appeared in the doorway. "Mama," he called. "Sheriff Coleridge is showing us his badge, and Reverend Thornton says we should stay for supper because it's too late to start for town." Eleanor squeezed Nathaniel's hand once, then released it. "We'll be right there," she told her son. As Joseph disappeared back inside, Nathaniel turned to Eleanor. "We should talk after the children are asleep," he said. "About Pine Creek. About What comes next? She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. Yes, we should. Together, they entered the cabin, closing the door against the gathering darkness. Inside, the fire blazed cheerfully, casting its light over the unlikely gathering. A sheriff, a minister, a widow, 2 children, and a hermit who had opened his door to a knock in the storm. For the first time in 10 years, Nathaniel's cabin felt truly warm. That night, after a simple but satisfying meal, the adults gathered around the fire while the children slept in the bedroom. Maxwell and Thornton had agreed to stay until morning, when they would all depart for Pine Creek together. Coleman won't give up easily, Maxwell warned, his voice low to avoid waking the children. He's not just a criminal, he's a businessman. And in his line of work, reputation is everything. What exactly is his line of work? Nathaniel asked. Beyond the obvious. Maxwell and Thornton exchanged glances. It was the minister who answered, his usual gentle manner, hardened by disgust. Coleman works for a syndicate that operates throughout the territories. They use the expansion of the railroad as cover for their true business: gambling houses, brothels, opium dens, anywhere men gather with money to spend and appetites to feed. But their most profitable venture, Maxwell continued, is in providing special merchandise to exclusive clients. Young girls mostly, orphans when they can get them purchased from desperate families when they can't. Eleanor's face was pale but composed. Like Rebecca. Yes, Thornton confirmed sadly. A child of her age and appearance, she would fetch a high price in certain quarters. Nathaniel's hand tightened on his coffee cup. And Coleman arranges these transactions? Maxwell nodded grimly. He's what they call a procurer. Finds the merchandise, delivers it, ensures no questions are asked afterward. He leaned forward, his expression grave. But Coleman isn't the real problem. He's just a middleman. The syndicate he works for has connections in high places, judges, politicians, even law enforcement. Which is why running may not be enough, Thornton added. They have eyes everywhere. If they want Rebecca badly enough, Pine Creek may not be far enough. A heavy silence fell over the group as they absorbed the implications. It was Eleanor who finally broke it, her voice steady despite the fear behind her eyes. Then where is far enough? San Francisco, New York? Another country entirely. Maybe nowhere, Maxwell admitted, not as long as the syndicate operates unchecked. Nathaniel, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. Then perhaps it's time someone checked them. 3 pairs of eyes turned to him in surprise. What are you suggesting? Maxwell asked. Nathaniel set down his cup, his expression resolute. Coleman is the key. He knows names, operations, connections. If he were persuaded to talk, he'd never testify, Maxwell objected. Men like that don't turn on their employers. Not willingly, Nathaniel agreed. But if he were caught in a compromising position, say attempting to kidnap a child with witnesses present, understanding dawned on Maxwell's face. You're talking about setting a trap. I'm talking about using Coleman's obsession against him, Nathaniel clarified. He wants Rebecca. He won't stop coming for her. So instead of running forever, we give him exactly what he wants on our terms. Eleanor shook her head vehemently. No, absolutely not. I won't use my daughter as bait. Not the real Rebecca, Nathaniel assured her. A deception. Enough to lure Coleman into showing his hand publicly where he can't deny his intentions. Thornton stroked his beard thoughtfully. It's dangerous, he mused. But if successful, it could break open the entire operation, save countless other children. Maxwell leaned back, considering. It would take planning, coordination, people we can trust. He looked at Nathaniel with newfound respect. You've thought about this before, haven't you? Nathaniel nodded, his eyes distant with memory. For 10 years, I've lived with the knowledge that the men who killed my family walk free, that they continue to destroy other lives while I hide in these mountains. His gaze hardened. Perhaps it's time I stopped hiding. Eleanor studied him, seeing not just the mountain hermit, but the soldier he had once been, the protector he could be again. What exactly would this plan involve? She asked cautiously. As Nathaniel outlined his thoughts, the others listened with growing interest. Questions were raised, objections addressed, refinements suggested. Gradually, a plan took shape, bold, risky, but with the potential to end Coleman's threat permanently. When they had hammered out the essential details, Maxwell rose and stretched. We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. Thornton agreed, accepting the bedroll Nathaniel offered. Maxwell would take the first watch outside with Nathaniel, relieving him in the early hours before dawn. As the cabin settled into night's quiet rhythms, Eleanor found herself alone with Nathaniel by the dying fire. The others had retired Thornton to a pallet near the hearth, the children still asleep in the bedroom. "Are you certain about this plan?" she asked softly. "It puts you at tremendous risk." Nathaniel stared into the embers, their glow reflecting in his eyes. "I've been dead in all but body for 10 years, he said quietly. Perhaps it's time to truly live again, even if it means risking what little life I have left. Eleanor reached out her hand, finding his in the firelight. You have more to live for than you know, Nathaniel Harmon. He looked up, surprised by the touch and by her words. In her eyes, he saw something he had not dared to hope for understanding. Acceptance and perhaps, in time, something more. When this is over, she continued, when Coleman is dealt with and my children are safe, I'd like to know the man you were before the mountain, before the grief. Nathaniel's throat tightened with emotion he had long denied himself. That man is long gone, he said hoarsely. But perhaps, there's someone new to be found in his place. Eleanor's smile was gentle, touched with a sadness that mirrored his own. I think I'd like to meet him, she said, when he's ready. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars blazing in the black vault of heaven. Inside, beside a dying fire, two broken souls found unexpected solace in shared pain and fragile hope. For Nathaniel Harmon, who had prayed his last prayer in the snow 4 days ago, it seemed the Lord had answered after all, not with peace or oblivion, but with purpose, with connection, with the chance to protect what he had once failed to save. Tomorrow would bring danger, challenges, the start of a journey back to a world he had abandoned. But tonight, in this moment of quiet understanding, Nathaniel felt something he had thought forever lost, the first faint stirrings of faith reborn. The journey to Pine Creek took most of the day. They departed at first light. Nathaniel, Eleanor, the children Maxwell and Reverend Thornton, traveling single file through snow that reached past the horses' knees in places. Maxwell led the way, rifle across his saddle eyes, constantly scanning for threats. Nathaniel brought up the rear, his weathered face set in lines of vigilant determination. Joseph rode with Thornton, while Rebecca shared Eleanor's mount. The little girl clutched her wooden star in one mittened hand, occasionally turning to ensure Nathaniel was still behind them. Each time he would nod reassuringly, and she would face forward again, comforted by his silent promise. They spoke little during the journey, conserving energy for the difficult terrain. The mountains in winter were beautiful, but merciless sunlight, glinting off pristine snow shadows, blew deep in the valleys, every breath visible in the crystalline air. It was a landscape Nathaniel knew intimately, had considered his only companion for a decade. Now, watching Eleanor's straight back ahead of him, the gentle way she cradled Rebecca against the cold, he wondered how he had survived so long without human connection. Pine Creek appeared in the late afternoon, a cluster of wooden buildings nestled in a valley, smoke rising from chimneys, windows glowing amber against the gathering dusk. A typical mining town, rough at the edges, but sheltered by surrounding peaks. As they descended toward civilization, Nathaniel felt his chest tighten with apprehension. How long since he had walked among so many people? How long since he had been anything other than the hermit on the mountain, the broken man who buried his family and retreated from the world? Maxwell seemed to sense his discomfort. He dropped back, allowing the others to ride ahead with Thornton. "Town's grown since you were here last," he observed. "New church school, even a proper jail now that I'm sheriff." His weathered face creased in a smile. "Still the same saloon, though. Man needs constance in a changing world." Nathaniel appreciated the attempt at normalcy. "How long have you been sheriff?" "5 years now." Maxwell adjusted his hat against the glare of snow. "Drifted after the war. Worked cattle drives, railroad construction, even tried my hand at prospecting." He shrugged. "Nothing stuck until I pinned on this badge." "Suits you," Nathaniel said. "You always did have a sense of justice." Maxwell studied his old friend. "And you always had a sense of duty, even when it cost you." The simple truth of those words hung between them as they continued their descent. Yes, Nathaniel had done his duty as a son, a soldier, a husband, a father. And yes, it had cost him everything. But watching Eleanor ahead with her children, Nathaniel wondered if perhaps duty might bring rewards as well as losses. If perhaps the cost, however steep, might sometimes be worth paying. Pine Creek welcomed them with curious stares and cautious nods. A town this size rarely saw strangers in winter, especially ones arriving with the sheriff and minister. Thornton led them directly to the church, a simple wooden structure with a modest steeple set apart from the main street. "The parsonage is behind the church," Thornton explained as they dismounted. "Small, but warm and private. You'll be safe there while we prepare." Nathaniel helped Eleanor down from her horse, his hands steady at her waist. Their eyes met briefly, an unspoken question passing between them. Was this right? Bringing her children into town where danger might follow? "It's only temporary," he said softly, answering her unvoiced concern. "Until Coleman is dealt with." Eleanor nodded, her resolve visible in the set of her shoulders. "I trust you," she replied, 3 simple words that carried more weight than she could know. The parsonage proved to be a snug 2-room cottage, modestly furnished but scrupulously clean. A fire already burned in the hearth, and the shelves held basic provisions. Someone, likely Thornton's housekeeper, had anticipated their needs. While Eleanor settled the children, the men gathered in the church to refine their plan. Maxwell spread a rough map of the town across a pew, weighing the corners with his gloves. "Coleman will come," he said without preamble. "The question is when and with how many men." "Soon," Nathaniel predicted. "He's not a patient man, and he has employers who will be demanding results." Thornton stroked his beard thoughtfully. "He'll send scouts first. To confirm the girl's presence, assess our defenses." "Let him," Maxwell said. "In fact, we'll make it easy for them. Let word spread that a widow and her children have taken refuge with the Reverend. Nothing unusual in that." Nathaniel traced the main street on the map with his finger. "When Coleman comes, he'll want to avoid attention. A night operation, most likely. Small team." "Which plays to our advantage," Maxwell continued. "Fewer witnesses to contest our version of events." They spent the next hour detailing positions, signals, contingencies. The church would be the bait, seemingly vulnerable, but actually a trap. Maxwell would position trusted deputies at key locations. Thornton would ensure the town's few officials understood enough to stay clear without knowing details that might leak. "And Eleanor and the children?" Nathaniel asked. "Where will they be during all this?" "Not in the parsonage," Maxwell said firmly. "Too obvious, too exposed." "My sister's home," Thornton suggested, "on the edge of town. No one would think to look there, and she's discreet." Nathaniel nodded, relieved. "And when will we move them?" "Tonight," Maxwell decided, "under cover of darkness. The fewer people who know their actual location, the better." As the men finalized their preparations, Eleanor appeared in the church doorway, her expression resolute. "Rebecca is asking for you, Nathaniel," she said softly. "She's frightened by the new surroundings." Maxwell and Thornton exchanged glances, but said nothing as Nathaniel rose to follow Eleanor to the parsonage. Inside, they found Rebecca sitting on a small bed, tears streaking her cheeks. Joseph sat beside her, one arm around his sister's shoulders, his young face solemn with responsibility. When Rebecca saw Nathaniel, she reached for him with a child's direct need for comfort. Without hesitation, he crossed to her, kneeling to meet her at eye level. "What troubles you, little one?" he asked gently. Rebecca's lower lip trembled. "This place isn't like your cabin. It smells different, and there are too many windows." Nathaniel understood immediately. After days in his isolated cabin, the relative exposure of the parsonage with its multiple windows facing the street felt dangerous to a child who knew she was being hunted. "You're right," he agreed, his tone serious, respecting her fear rather than dismissing it. "There are more windows here, but there are also more people watching over you." He took her small hand in his calloused one. "Sheriff Coleridge, Reverend Thornton, your mother, Joseph, and me. 5 protectors." Rebecca considered this, then asked in a small voice, "But what if the bad men come while I'm sleeping? I won't have the wooden bear to guard the door." Nathaniel reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a new carving he had worked on during their journey. A tiny wooden wolf, its pose alert, ears forward, watchful. "Wolves are even better guards than bears," he told her, placing the figure in her palm. "They can see in the dark, and they never sleep when danger is near." Rebecca studied this carving with solemn appreciation, then placed it carefully on the windowsill. "Will you stay until I fall asleep?" she asked. Nathaniel glanced at Eleanor, who nodded her permission. "Of course," he said, settling onto the edge of the bed. As Rebecca lay back against the pillow, Nathaniel began to hum softly an old hymn his father had sung, one that had brought comfort in his own childhood. The simple melody filled the small room, weaving a cocoon of safety around them all. Joseph leaned against the wall, watching Nathaniel with thoughtful eyes. "My father never sang to us," he observed quietly. Nathaniel met the boy's gaze with understanding. "Some men find it hard to show tenderness," he said. "It doesn't mean they don't feel it." Joseph's expression suggested he doubted this in his father's case, but appreciated the sentiment nonetheless. He moved to sit on the floor near Nathaniel's feet, drawing comfort from proximity to this man who had become, in just a few days, a figure of stability in his uncertain world. Eleanor stood in the doorway watching this tableau with complex emotions playing across her face. When Rebecca's breathing finally deepened into sleep, Nathaniel carefully rose, gesturing for Joseph to take his place beside his sister. "Get some rest," he told the boy. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." Joseph nodded, serious beyond his years. "I'll watch over her," he promised. "I know you will," Nathaniel said, resting his hand briefly on the boy's head. "You're a good brother, Joseph. Your sister is fortunate to have you." The simple praise brought a flush of pride to Joseph's cheeks. He straightened his shoulders and took up his position beside Rebecca, sentinel to her slumber. In the main room, Eleanor poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot warming on the small stove. She handed one to Nathaniel, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "Thank you," she said softly, "for what you did in there." Nathaniel cradled the cup, appreciating its warmth against the chill settling into his bones. "Children understand more than we give them credit for," he replied. "Rebecca knows she's in danger. Pretending otherwise would only frighten her more." Eleanor studied him over the rim of her cup. "You were good with children, before." It wasn't a question, but Nathaniel answered anyway. "Grace was the center of our world. Emily and I—" He paused, the familiar pain of their memory surprisingly muted now. "We had hoped for more children, a brother or sister for Grace." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said simply. Nathaniel nodded acknowledgement. "What about Joseph's father?" he asked after a moment. "Coleman claimed he wasn't yours." Eleanor's expression hardened. "Another of Coleman's lies. Joseph is my son by birth, though not Albert's by blood." And she sighed, setting down her cup. "I was widowed young with a small child. Albert seemed kind, stable. A chance at security for Joseph and me. But he wasn't what he seemed. No." Eleanor's voice held old bitterness. "He was weak, gambling debts, drinking. Then Rebecca came along and for a while things improved. He doted on her. But when his debts grew too large—" She trailed off, unable to complete the terrible thought. "He saw a way out," Nathaniel finished for her. Eleanor nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "How does a father sell his child? How does a human being make that choice?" Nathaniel had no answer. He had seen the depths of human depravity during the war, men capable of unspeakable cruelty, of betrayal beyond comprehension. Yet the deliberate sacrifice of one's own child remained incomprehensible. "When I confronted Albert," Eleanor continued, her voice steady despite the pain it carried, "he said it was already done, that men would come for her the next day, that the money would clear our debts and give us, him and me and Joseph, a fresh start." Her laugh was bitter, broken, "As if I would ever leave my daughter, as if I could live knowing what had become of her." "So you shot him," Nathaniel said without judgment. "Yes." Eleanor met his gaze directly. "We struggled. The gun went off. When he was dead, I took what money I could find, gathered the children, and ran." She pushed up her sleeve, revealing again the jagged scar on her forearm. "His last gift to me." Nathaniel reached across the table, his fingers gently tracing the scar. "You did what any mother would do," he said. "What any decent human being would do." Eleanor's hand turned, capturing his. "And you?" she asked softly. "What brought the famous angel of death to a lonely mountain cabin?" Nathaniel tensed at the name, but did not withdraw his hand. "After the war," he began slowly, "I came home changed." Emily tried to understand. But how could she? How could anyone who hadn't seen what we saw, done what we did? He stared into the middle distance, seeing not the parsonage walls but battlefields long past. "I started drinking, gambling, anything to numb the memories. Emily was patient, but patience has limits. We argued. I left for days at a time." His grip tightened unconsciously on Eleanor's hand. "I fell in with men who prey on weakness. Borrowed money I couldn't repay. When they came collecting, I didn't have what they wanted." "So they burned your home," Eleanor said gently, "with your family inside." Nathaniel nodded, the old guilt rising like bile in his throat. Emily and Grace weren't supposed to be there. They were meant to be visiting her sister. But there was a change of plans. He closed his eyes briefly against the memory. I wasn't there to protect them. My choices, my weaknesses led directly to their deaths. Eleanor's other hand came up, cradling his between both of hers. You didn't strike the match, Nathaniel. Might as well have, he said grimly. The result was the same. They sat in silence, then joined by hands and by the understanding that can only exist between those who have walked through fire and emerged scarred but alive on the other side. Finally, Eleanor spoke again. What happened to the men who burned your home? Nathaniel's expression darkened. Some died in the years after. Accidents mostly, though I sometimes wonder. He shook his head. But their employer, the man who gave the order, he prospered, built a business empire on others' suffering. Do you know his name? Harrison Reed. Nathaniel said, the name bitter on his tongue. A respectable businessman now, beyond the reach of justice. Eleanor's eyes widened with recognition. Reed, the railroad investor. Nathaniel nodded, surprised. You've heard of him. Albert worked for the railroad, Eleanor explained. Reed's name came up occasionally. He has connections to the Transcontinental Detective Agency. Her brow furrowed in thought. In fact, Albert once mentioned that Reed was a major investor in special establishments throughout the territories. Nathaniel went very still, pieces clicking into place with terrible clarity. Special establishments, he repeated, like the kind that would purchase young girls. Eleanor paled as understanding dawned. You don't think? I think, Nathaniel said grimly, that our separate tragedies may share a common author. He rose abruptly, his mind racing. I need to speak with Maxwell and Thornton. This changes things. Eleanor caught his arm. Nathaniel, wait. If Reed is truly behind all this, behind Coleman, behind what happened to your family, then we're facing something much bigger than we realized. Yes, he agreed, his expression set with newfound purpose, and all the more reason to end it. Night had fallen over Pine Creek, the streets empty, save for a few hardy souls hurrying between saloon and home. Nathaniel stood in the shadow of the church steeple watching as Maxwell escorted Eleanor and the children to Thornton's sister's house on the outskirts of town. They moved quickly, heads down, faces obscured anonymous figures in the darkness. When they were safely out of sight, Nathaniel made his way to the sheriff's office, where Thornton waited with Maxwell's most trusted deputy, a stoic man named Caleb Wilson. They're settled, Maxwell announced upon his return. Sarah's made them comfortable. No one saw us arrive. Nathaniel nodded, relieved. Good. Now we need to discuss our next steps in light of new information. He outlined what Eleanor had told him, the connection between Reed, the railroad, and Coleman's operation. As he spoke, Maxwell's expression grew increasingly grim. Harrison Reed, the sheriff said when Nathaniel finished. That complicates matters significantly. He has friends in territorial government connections all the way to Washington. I'm familiar with Reed's reputation, Thornton added, his usual gentle manner hardening. His charitable donations have built hospitals and schools, but rumors persist about the source of his wealth. More than rumors, Nathaniel insisted. If Eleanor is right, Reed is the puppet master behind Coleman's operation. Perhaps behind the men who killed my family as well. Maxwell paced the small office, thinking aloud. Even if that's true, proving it would be nearly impossible. Men like Reed insulate themselves with layers of subordinates. Coleman might not even know who he ultimately works for. Then we start with Coleman, Nathaniel said firmly. As planned, but we expand our objective not just to protect Eleanor and the children, but to extract information about Reed's involvement. Caleb, who had been silent until now, spoke up. Coleman won't talk easily. Men in his position know that betrayal means death. "Every man has his breaking point," Nathaniel replied, his voice carrying the cold certainty of experience. "I intend to find Coleman's." The men spent the next hour refining their strategy. The basic plan remained unchanged: use the parsonage as bait, allowing word to spread that Eleanor and the children were sheltered there. When Coleman came, they would be waiting. But now capture rather than confrontation became the priority. Coleman, alive and talking, was worth more than Coleman dead and silent. "He'll send scouts first," Maxwell predicted. "Probably tomorrow. We should make sure they see enough to report back, but not enough to raise suspicion." Thornton nodded. "I'll arrange for Eleanor to be glimpsed briefly at the church, as if she's staying there. Just enough to confirm her presence." "And the actual trap?" Caleb asked. 3 nights from now," Nathaniel decided. "Give Coleman time to gather his men, plan his approach. He'll come at night expecting minimal resistance. Instead, he'll find us waiting at every turn." Maxwell studied the town map, marking positions with small stones. Caleb here watching the main approach, Jacob on the roof of the mercantile covering the alley. "I'll take the church itself. Nathaniel, you'll be inside the parsonage, the last line of defense, and the face Coleman least expects to see." The plan was solid, as thorough as they could make it, given their limited resources. Yet, as the men dispersed to their assigned tasks, Nathaniel couldn't shake a sense of foreboding. They were setting events in motion that could not be easily stopped, challenging powers far beyond their small group. He made his way to Thornton's sister's house, moving through shadows, avoiding the few lit windows along his path. Sarah Thornton, a widow herself, gray-haired and sharp-eyed, admitted him without question, then discreetly withdrew to her own room. Eleanor waited for him in the small parlor, a single lamp burning low. She had been reading from a worn Bible which she set aside as he entered. "The children?" he asked softly. "Asleep," she replied. "Rebecca asked for you again at bedtime." Nathaniel nodded, touched by the child's attachment, but focused on more urgent matters. "Everything is arranged. 3 days from now, we end this." Eleanor studied his face in the lamplight. "You found something in what I told you about Reed." "A connection," Nathaniel confirmed, taking the chair opposite hers. "Possibly the key to understanding why our paths have crossed." He explained their revised plan, not just to capture Coleman, but to force him to implicate Reed. As he spoke, Eleanor's expression shifted from hope to concern. "Reed is powerful," she warned. "If he discovers what we're attempting—" "He won't," Nathaniel assured her. "Not until it's too late." Eleanor wasn't convinced. "Men like Reed don't fall easily, Nathaniel. They have resources, contingencies." "Every man can fall," Nathaniel said with quiet certainty. "I've seen it. War taught me that much, at least." Eleanor leaned forward, her face earnest in the golden lamplight. "Promise me something," she said. "Promise that if things go wrong, you'll get the children to safety. Forget Reed. Forget justice. Just make sure Joseph and Rebecca are safe." The intensity in her voice struck Nathaniel deeply. Here was a mother willing to sacrifice everything: justice, vengeance, even her own safety for her children's well-being. "I promise," he said solemnly. "Their safety comes first, always." Relief softened Eleanor's features. "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "And after, if we succeed." "What then?" The question caught Nathaniel unprepared. He had been so focused on the immediate threat on the plan to capture Coleman that he hadn't allowed himself to think beyond it. What did come after? Return to his mountain cabin, continue his solitary existence. The thought held none of its former appeal. "I don't know," he admitted honestly. For 10 years I've lived only in the present one day to the next. The future was—" He trailed off, struggling to articulate the emptiness that had defined his life for so long. "Non-existent," Eleanor finished for him. "I understand. After Albert, after what he tried to do to Rebecca, I could only think of running, of surviving until the next day." Her eyes held his warm with empathy and something more. "But children need more than survival. They need hope, a future." "And you?" Nathaniel asked quietly. "What do you need, Eleanor?" She looked away, vulnerability momentarily replacing her usual strength. "Peace," she said softly. "Safety for my children. A place where Rebecca can grow up without fear, where Joseph can be a boy instead of a protector." She met his gaze again, and perhaps in time, a chance to be more than just a mother, to be a woman again. The simple honesty of her words touched something deep in Nathaniel, a longing he had denied for so long that its resurgence felt almost like pain. To be more than a survivor. To be a man again, with all that entailed. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "when this is over, we could help each other find those things." Eleanor's smile was like sunrise after the longest night. "Perhaps we could." The moment stretched between them, fragile and precious, a tentative bridge across the chasm of their separate griefs, toward something new. Then from the bedroom came a small cry, Rebecca calling out in her sleep. Eleanor rose immediately, maternal instinct overriding all else. "I should go to her." Nathaniel nodded, understanding. "I'll return tomorrow night. Same time." At the doorway, Eleanor paused, looking back at him. "Be careful, Nathaniel, for all our sakes." He watched her disappear into the bedroom, then let himself out into the night. As he made his way back to the church where he would sleep these next few days, Nathaniel found himself doing something he had not done sincerely in years, praying. Not for himself, but for the woman and children who had awakened him from a decade of living death. For their safety, their future, and for the chance that somehow against all odds, they might find it together. The next 2 days passed according to plan. Word spread through Pine Creek that Reverend Thornton was sheltering a widow and her children at the parsonage. Eleanor made a carefully orchestrated appearance at the church, visible enough to be noticed, but brief enough to maintain the illusion of seclusion. Meanwhile, Maxwell and his deputies observed several strangers in town, men who asked casual questions about the church, the Reverend, his recent visitors. Scouts for Coleman, undoubtedly assessing the situation before their employer committed to action. Nathaniel spent his days at the church visible enough to be recognized as a mountain man seeking spiritual counsel, a cover story that explained his presence without raising alarm. His nights he spent at Sarah Thornton's house, planning with Eleanor, telling stories to the children, building a connection that grew stronger with each passing hour. On the third day, as evening approached, the waiting ended. One of Maxwell's deputies reported seeing Coleman himself arrive in town, accompanied by 4 men. They took rooms at the saloon, claiming to be railroad surveyors passing through. "Tonight," Maxwell confirmed when they gathered at the sheriff's office, "Coleman's not a patient man, and he won't want to linger in town any longer than necessary." Nathaniel nodded, checking his revolver one final time. Everyone knows their positions. The men reviewed their assignments again, Caleb watching the main street, Jacob on the mercantile roof, Maxwell in the church, Nathaniel in the parsonage. Their goal was to capture Coleman alive, force him to implicate Reed, then bring formal charges that even Reed's influence couldn't dismiss. As dusk gathered, Nathaniel made his way to the parsonage, entering through the back door. The small cottage stood empty, a fire burning low in the hearth to maintain the illusion of occupancy. He positioned himself in the shadows of the main room, rifle ready, waiting. Hours passed. The town grew quiet, as honest citizens retired for the night, and even the saloon's raucous activity dwindled. The fire burned down to embers, casting the room in deepening shadow. Just after midnight, Nathaniel heard it, the soft crunch of boots on snow approaching from the rear of the building. Not the main path, but a more circuitous route, less visible from the street. Coleman was being cautious. Nathaniel remained motionless, controlling his breathing, listening intently. Multiple footsteps, moving with practiced stealth. 3 men, perhaps 4, surrounding the small building. A soft scraping at the back door, someone working the lock. Nathaniel tensed, ready. According to the plan, Maxwell and his men would wait until Coleman was inside before closing the trap, ensuring they caught him in the act of attempted kidnapping. The door opened slowly, hinges protesting softly in the silence. A figure slipped inside, tall, lean, moving with predatory grace. Behind him came another, broader, carrying what appeared to be a sack or bag. Nathaniel recognized Coleman immediately, even in the dim light, the same cold eyes, the same calculating posture. The second man was unfamiliar, but his purpose was clear from the restraints visible at his belt. They had come prepared to take a child. Coleman scanned the main room, then gestured toward the bedroom door. The second man nodded and moved forward, reaching for the latch. "She's not there," Nathaniel said quietly, stepping from the shadows, rifle raised. Coleman froze, then slowly turned his hand, hovering near his holstered revolver. "Sergeant Harmon," he said, his voice betraying only mild surprise. "I wondered if you'd follow them to town." "Step away from the door," Nathaniel ordered. "Both of you. Hands where I can see them." The second man looked to Coleman for direction, clearly uncertain. Coleman, however, seemed almost amused. "You've gone to considerable trouble," he observed, raising his hand slowly. "Setting a trap like this. I'm almost flattered." "On your knees," Nathaniel commanded. "Both of you." Coleman didn't move. "I think not." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You're not alone, are you? The sheriff, perhaps. Waiting outside." As if in answer, the front door opened, revealing Maxwell badge gleaming on his chest, revolver steady in his hand. "Victor Coleman," Maxwell announced formally. "You're under arrest for attempted kidnapping, trafficking, and conspiracy." Coleman's smile never wavered. "Am I? And what evidence do you have of these alleged crimes?" "Sheriff, I'm a businessman making a social call." "At midnight," Nathaniel challenged. "With restraints and a gag." Coleman shrugged elegantly. "The world is full of misunderstandings." Maxwell stepped further into the room, keeping his revolver trained on the 2 men. "We have witnesses to your operation, Coleman. Testimony about your role in procuring young girls for brothels across the territory." For the first time, a flicker of concern crossed Coleman's face. "Witnesses? What witnesses?" "Me, for one," came a new voice from the doorway. Reverend Thornton stepped inside, his usual gentle demeanor replaced by stern resolution. "I've documented your activities for nearly a year. Names, dates, transactions. Enough to hang you and your employers several times over." Coleman's composure slipped further. "You're bluffing. A country preacher playing detective." "Not bluffing," Thornton replied calmly. "My church may be small, but my congregation includes people in many places. People who see things, hear things. People who've been waiting for justice." Nathaniel watched Coleman carefully, noting the calculations visible behind his eyes. The man was cornered, but not defeated, still searching for an angle and escape. "Even if what you say is true," Coleman said finally, "my employers would never allow such evidence to reach a courtroom. They have influence you cannot imagine." Harrison Reed's influence, you mean? Nathaniel asked quietly. The effect of the name was immediate. Coleman's face paled, his confident posture faltering. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do, Nathaniel pressed. Reed isn't just your employer. He's the architect of this entire operation, the man who built an empire on human suffering. Coleman's companion shifted nervously, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Victor, he muttered. Maybe we should shut up. Coleman snapped, his smooth veneer cracking. He turned back to Nathaniel, his expression hardening. You're making dangerous accusations, Sergeant, the kind that get men killed. I'm already familiar with Reed's methods, Nathaniel replied, his voice cold with suppressed rage. He had my family burned alive over a gambling debt. How many other families has he destroyed? How many children sold into slavery under his orders? Coleman's eyes narrowed with sudden recognition. Harmon, he repeated, as if the name had new significance. Of course, the sharpshooter whose family died so tragically. His smile returned cruel now rather than confident. Reed mentioned you once, said you were a loose end he'd never quite managed to tie up. The confirmation hit Nathaniel like a physical blow. Reed had remembered him, had spoken of him, had considered him a loose end. All these years, while Nathaniel grieved in isolation, Reed had continued his evil unchecked, perhaps even expanding it. It ends now, Nathaniel said, his resolve hardening. You're going to confess, Coleman. Names, dates, operations, everything. You're going to help us bring Reed down. Coleman laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. You're a fool, Harmon. Reed is untouchable. Even if I talked, even if you somehow managed to bring charges, he'd walk free. Men like him always do. Not this time, Maxwell interjected. This time we have evidence, witnesses, and a federal marshal arriving tomorrow who's been building a case against Reed for years. This last was a bluff. There was no marshal, no federal case, but Coleman had no way of knowing that. His confidence visibly wavered. You're lying, he said, but without conviction. Surrender now. Maxwell continued, pressing the advantage. Cooperate with our investigation, and I'll recommend leniency. Continue to protect Reed, and you'll hang alongside him. The room fell silent as Coleman weighed his options, the only sound the soft crackle of dying embers in the hearth. His companion shifted anxiously, clearly, wanting to be anywhere but here. Finally, Coleman spoke, his voice low and resigned. Reed will kill me if I talk. Reed will kill you anyway, Nathaniel countered. Men like him don't tolerate failure. Your only chance is to help us bring him down before he learns of your capture. The truth of these words was evident in Coleman's expression. He knew Reed's ruthlessness firsthand, knew the price of disappointing him. What guarantees do I have? He asked finally. If I cooperate. My word, Maxwell said firmly. Protection while you testify, then safe passage to wherever you choose to go afterward. Coleman considered this, then nodded slowly. I want it in writing, and I want— His words were cut short by the crash of breaking glass as the front window shattered inward. In the same instant, a deafening report split the air, and Coleman jerked backward, a red stain blossoming on his chest. Shooter! Maxwell shouted, diving for cover. Nathaniel reacted instinctively, dropping to the floor and pulling Thornton down with him as more shots ripped through the parsonage windows. Coleman's companion was not so fortunate. A bullet caught him in the throat, and he fell gurgling horribly, blood pulsing between his fingers. Coleman lay motionless, eyes open, but unseeing a perfect bullet hole centered in his chest. The shot had come from outside, a sharpshooter's work, clean and precise. Maxwell crawled to the door, staying below window level. Caleb, he shouted. Jacob Shooter on the north side. More gunfire answered him, not from the unknown assailant, but from Coleman's remaining men, who had apparently been waiting outside as backup. The parsonage erupted in chaos as bullets splintered wood and shattered glass. "The back door," Nathaniel urged, pulling Thornton toward the kitchen. "We need to get out before they surround us completely." They made it to the kitchen just as the front door burst open, men pouring in with guns blazing. Maxwell returned fire, the exchange deafening in the confined space. "Go!" Maxwell shouted to Nathaniel. "Get to Eleanor and the children. I'll hold them here." Nathaniel hesitated, unwilling to leave his friend in danger. But Eleanor and the children were the priority now, especially with Coleman dead and a professional shooter in play. Someone had known about their trap, had moved to silence Coleman before he could implicate Reed. "We'll send help," Nathaniel promised, then slipped out the back door with Thornton close behind. They moved through darkness, staying low, using buildings for cover as they made their way toward the edge of town. Behind them, gunfire continued to echo from the parsonage and surrounding streets as Maxwell and his deputies engaged Coleman's men. "Reed must have had a contingency plan," Thornton panted as they paused in the shadow of the livery stable. "Someone in town informed him." Nathaniel nodded grimly. "The shooter was professional, took Coleman out with a single shot in near darkness." "The children," Thornton urged. "We need to reach them before Reed's men do." They continued through town now, hearing shouts and alarm as the gunfire roused Pine Creek's citizens from sleep. Lanterns flickered to life in windows, doors opened cautiously, curious and frightened faces peering out. At the outskirts, Sarah Thornton's small house stood dark and quiet, seemingly untouched by the chaos engulfing the town center. But as they approached, Nathaniel sensed something wrong, a stillness too complete, an absence of the normal sounds of a household at night. "Wait," he whispered, catching Thornton's arm. "Something's not right." They approached more cautiously, circling to the back of the house where a single window showed the faintest glimmer of light. Nathaniel peered carefully through the glass. The kitchen was empty, but signs of struggle were evident. An overturned chair, a broken cup on the floor, a smear of something dark on the wall that might have been blood. "No," Thornton breathed, seeing the same signs. "Sarah." "Stay focused," Nathaniel ordered, though his own heart raced with fear. "We need to check the whole house." They entered through the back door, moving silently from room to room. The house was empty. No Sarah, no Eleanor, no children. But in the bedroom, Nathaniel found something that stopped his breath. Rebecca's wooden star broken in half, lying on the floor beside an overturned bed. "They were taken," Thornton said, his voice hollow with shock. "While we were setting our trap, Reed's men were springing theirs." Nathaniel knelt, picking up the broken pieces of the star, his gift to Rebecca, her talisman against fear. Rage rose in him, cold and clarifying. "Reed," he said, the name a curse on his lips. This was his plan all along. Let us capture Coleman, then take the children as leverage. But how did he know where they were? Thornton wondered. Only a handful of people knew they were staying with Sarah. Nathaniel's mind raced, reviewing every detail of the past 3 days. Who had known of their plan? Who had access to information about Eleanor and the children's location? The deputy, he realized suddenly. Caleb. He was at every planning meeting. He knew everything. Thornton shook his head in disbelief. Caleb Wilson has been Maxwell's deputy for 2 years, a trusted man. Everyone has a price, Nathaniel said bitterly. Reed found his. A sound at the front of the house brought them both to alert footsteps on the porch, then the door opening. Nathaniel raised his rifle ready to fire, but lowered it immediately when Maxwell staggered in, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. "They're gone," Maxwell gasped, supporting himself against the wall. Coleman's men retreated, but not before setting fire to the church. Half the town's fighting the blaze. "Eleanor and the children have been taken," Nathaniel said grimly. "Sarah, too, most likely. And I think Caleb is working for Reed." Maxwell's expression hardened. "Caleb is dead, shot in the back while helping put out the fire." He wiped blood from his eyes, but before he died, he confessed. Said Reed paid him to report our movements, our plans. "Then Reed knows everything," Thornton said heavily. "He's been a step ahead of us from the beginning." Nathaniel paced the small room, mind working furiously. "Reed wouldn't have taken them far. He needs them close as leverage." "Leverage for what?" Maxwell asked. "For me," Nathaniel replied, the truth crystallizing in his mind. "This isn't just about silencing Coleman or protecting his operation. This is personal. Reed wants to finish what he started 10 years ago." Understanding dawned on Maxwell's face. "You, the loose end." "Yes." Nathaniel looked down at the broken star in his hand, then carefully tucked the pieces into his pocket. "Reed wants me to suffer as I made him suffer. Taking Eleanor and the children, it's his way of repeating history, of showing his power." "Then he'll contact you," Thornton reasoned. "Set terms." "He won't have to," Nathaniel said with grim certainty. "I know where he's taken them." At their questioning looks, he explained, "The old Blackwater mine, 5 miles north of town. Abandoned now, but it would provide shelter privacy. And it has significance." "What significance?" Maxwell asked. "It's where I killed 3 of Reed's men 8 years ago," Nathaniel replied quietly. "They were transporting young girls. I intervened, left no survivors." Maxwell and Thornton exchanged shocked glances. This was a side of Nathaniel they hadn't known existed, the avenging angel, who had not, after all, spent a decade in passive grief. "Reed would know about that," Nathaniel continued. "He'd see the symmetry in using the same location for his revenge." "It could be a trap," Maxwell warned. "Of course it's a trap," Nathaniel agreed. "But it's also our only chance to save Eleanor and the children." He checked his rifle, his expression set with deadly purpose. "Reed thinks he's recreating my past, my failure to protect my family. But he's wrong. This time the ending will be different." Maxwell straightened, wincing at the movement. "I'll gather what men I can trust. We'll approach from multiple directions, surround the mine." "No," Nathaniel said firmly. "Reed will be expecting that. He'll have men watching every approach. At the first sign of a force, he'll kill the hostages." He shook his head. "I have to go alone." "That's suicide," Maxwell protested. "Not necessarily," Thornton interjected thoughtfully. "Reed wants Nathaniel to suffer, to beg, to witness his new family's destruction as he did before." The old minister's eyes were hard, showing steel beneath his gentle exterior. "That gives us an advantage. Reed's pride, his need for personal vengeance, makes him predictable." Nathaniel nodded in agreement. "I'll go in first alone, as Reed expects. Draw his attention, his focus. Maxwell, you and any men you trust absolutely will follow at a distance. No uniforms, no badges. Just men out for a late-night ride." "And then?" Maxwell asked. "And then," Nathaniel said, his voice cold with resolve, "we end this, once and for all." The 3 men looked at each other, bound by purpose, and by the knowledge that the next few hours would determine not just the fate of 4 innocent lives, but the future of their own souls as well. 1 hour, Nathaniel decided. "I leave in 1 hour. No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, you wait at least 30 minutes before approaching the mine. Reed needs to believe I'm alone, desperate. Maxwell clasped Nathaniel's shoulder. Be careful, old friend. Reed's had 10 years to plan this revenge, and I've had 10 years to prepare for this reckoning, Nathaniel replied. It's time Harrison Reed learned the true meaning of judgment. Outside, the first light of dawn touched the eastern horizon, pale gold, against the retreating night. A new day was coming to Pine Creek, bringing with it either deliverance or destruction for those who had dared to challenge the powerful and corrupt. For Nathaniel Harmon, former sharpshooter, grieving widower, reluctant protector, the path ahead was clear. He had prayed for purpose in the snow outside his cabin, for an answer to a decade of pain. That prayer had been answered in the form of a widow and her children, in the chance to protect what he had once failed to save. Now, as he prepared to face his oldest enemy, Nathaniel offered one final prayer, not for himself, but for Eleanor, Joseph, Rebecca, and Sarah. For their safety, their future, and for the chance that somehow, against all odds, they might yet find it together. The broken wooden star rested in his pocket, a reminder of promises made and a determination that this time evil would not triumph. This time the angel of death would direct his terrible skill not at enemies of a nation, but at the enemies of innocence itself.